Okay.
No, just put it in the box, yeah.
Their role in the poll tax campaign is a badge of law-breaking honour they exploit to oppose water privatisation with more verbal aggression than their rivals. Labour insists the law should be obeyed, and the SNP has yet to decide how it will oppose the sale. But Militant is committed in advance to a campaign of illegal obstruction.
It's a strategy of mass non-payment of private water bills.
I'm very confident of our ability to compete with Militant on an issue like the privatisation of Scottish water, because there's a very strong Scottish dimension to that. I mean, only 3% of people in Scotland want water in private hands, and yet we're in a situation in Scottish politics where that's seriously being canvassed as a political option by the government.
After the Militant team had gone, we came back to the estate to find out what the residents here thought of the street meeting.
Last year, the Labour that's all been in have not done nothing really. They just sit about. So you've got to let somebody else in that's going to try and do something. The boy looks a young enough boy. So let him in, give him a crack at it.
Who am I supporting?
Yeah.
SNP.
Why?
Because they're good for Scotland, are they not?
Who are you supporting in the by-election?
Labour.
Why?
I've always supported Labour. I believe in their cause.
What about the Scottish Militant? Are you impressed by them?
Not really. I'm not into militancy.
When you come into individual by-elections, it's not the false militant political prospectus that's going to be examined. It's basically the issues of housing and dampness, the real issues which affect people in these real areas. Where I think Militant's false is they've got their own political agenda, which they don't talk about in these local by-elections.
Do people in Dundee really understand your ideas? I mean, they're based on Marx and Lenin and Trotsky.
Absolutely. People in Dundee, as elsewhere, understand our ideas. We should never take for granted the level of understanding of working class people. They know the difference between right and wrong, just and injustice, and they know that the capitalist system is rotten from top to bottom because the rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer. They want to turn that on its head. That's what we want to do, and that's why we're getting support for those ideas.
But you don't advertise the fact that you're revolutionary socialists.
We advertise the fact quite clearly that we want to change the system.
The Labour Party and its affiliated trade unions are the political establishment in Scotland, and there are signs that they're responding to the militant threat. Last week at the Scottish Trades Union Congress, the emphasis was on the bread and butter issues of industry and jobs.
The Tories want to reposition Britain as a labour market in Europe and across the world. In effect, to convert us into a kind of industrial discount store where labour is cheap and social standards low.
In fact, there's a shift taking place in Scottish Labour politics as Tom Clark plays down Home Rule for Scotland in favour of putting Labour's case on the kind of issues that Militant is pressing on the doorsteps.
I think it's important that we relate the case for a Scottish Parliament to our policy on jobs, our policies on the health service, our demands on education, and our attack on poverty. And I think the more that we do that, the more the Scottish people will feel that we're right in our commitment to deliver a Scottish Parliament.
The big industrial issue in Scotland at the moment is the Timex dispute. By coincidence, a national news story on the doorstep of the Dundee by-election. Most of the workforce at Timex were sacked while on strike against pay cuts. Labour urges negotiation, while Militant is prominent in the weekly mass picket. And Tommy Sheridan was arrested here last month.
The political parties showed support for Timex here today, do you reckon?
Militant believes workers will be radicalised by strikes to reject conventional politics. Every morning for 13 weeks, 2 unmarked grey buses have picked up replacement workers in Dundee and driven them through the picket line. Militant does have a line which appeals to some people in Dundee, which points out that the Labour Party has accepted a lot of trade union law reform put through by the Conservative government.
I think that's exactly the sort of thing that Militant would say, wouldn't they? What they fail to accept or fail to explain is that because times change, it would be absurd. It would be absurd for the Labour Party to fight the next election on the same programme as we fought in 1979.
Perhaps time has stood still in parts of Dundee and similar places across Scotland because Militant is a threat to Labour. Militant has already won 6 council seats in Glasgow and may also open the way for the nationalists by taking votes from Labour. Militant's success in Scotland has exposed the weakness at the core of Labour's electoral base.
The anguish of Bosnia has produced strange political bedfellows at Westminster. When Douglas Hurd, defending the government's reluctance to lift the arms embargo or launch airstrikes, quotes Tony Benn, you can tell that party lines are shattered. Those like Benn and Dennis Healy, who served in the last war, are noticeably less inclined towards military options. The Foreign Secretary, with a round of backbench meetings, steadied Tory nerves in the same direction. But his real problem lies in Washington, where the new administration is flapping in the wind. Malcolm Rifkin's mission there was as much to find out what's going on as to influence thinking. Ministers are cautious in their criticism, but a Labour frontbencher said loftily it was no surprise that President Clinton, governor of a small state like Arkansas, was all at sea in foreign policy. It was like asking the chairman of an English county council to be Prime Minister. David Owen has been heard to murmur that today's Washington looks alarmingly like the Carter administration when he was Foreign Secretary, all rhetoric and less substance. But behind an uneasy feeling that Bill Clinton is still working the campaign rhetoric out of his system, London will be reluctant to break with Washington. This is why ministers are noticeably less firm in their rejection of an airstrike than of reopening the floodgates to weapons for the Balkans. Government and opposition are less far apart than Commons exchanges may suggest, and Labour is content that there should be no vote at the end of next Thursday's debate. John Smith's speech last weekend was both a reaction to the horrors people are seeing nightly on television and an attempt to keep his party united. A right-wing backbencher is also alarmed by America's current instability, especially after a knowledgeable visitor from Washington told him that, of course, Bosnia was a priority for Clinton. About 6th. The MP said dryly that it wasn't often he found himself signing the same Commons motions as Audrey Wise and others on the left. A right-wing frontbencher would also like action. We've been behaving like Charlies over this for 6 months, he said. Now it's a watershed. We've got to say we'll do something, even if there is an element of bluff. Then he went off, acknowledging that he was sounding improbably like a latter-day Palmerston. The Shadow Cabinet is being more cautious. Jack Cunningham reminded the Parliamentary Party that Clause 4 of their constitution contains, as well as the better-known section on common ownership, a commitment to the United Nations. So he has carefully linked their proposal for a punitive airstrike against Serbian supply lines within Bosnia to the requirement that it be authorised by the UN. He recognises that even this may stop British troops continuing to supervise humanitarian aid. Douglas Hurd, whose reputation so far has been enhanced by his handling of an appalling problem, does not think it's worth taking this risk. But pressure from Washington may turn it into an option that's preferable to the arming of Muslims, Croats and Serbs for a fight to the finish. MPs are reflecting sadly on the change in the mood since after the Gulf War. An international reign of peace supervised by the United Nations was much talked about. Instead, they see both former superpowers beset by domestic troubles, with the Western members of the Security Council afraid to ask Boris Yeltsin to face down the pan-Slav feelings of his voters in today's referendum. There's no nostalgia at all at Westminster for the golden days of the Cold War.